Good afternoon to everyone for joining today's webinar. I hope everyone hears me okay. Thank you. Thanks for joining. We will be covering today's webinar some initial views on next winter's outlook. ENTSO E publishes before every winter and summer a seasonal adequacy assessment to understand where we are in terms of adequacy risk for the months ahead, to inform authorities, stakeholders on causes, context, and possible mitigation actions. Of course, the outlook we're publishing today is an exceptional one. With the ongoing energy crisis, we advanced our work significantly within ENTSO E and with all member TSOs to provide an analysis even earlier than normal. What you see today is a set of early views which we built on months of intense work in the past summer and weeks, while we keep reviewing and capturing data assumptions and modeling outcomes within our TSO community. We had close alignment with TSOs and with authorities at national and European level, and as always, we advise everyone to look closely at this outlook published today as a complement to detailed national studies. We see a large number of you joining us for today's webinar, which is really exciting. Thanks for your high interest. It's a higher interest than usual and for other seasonal outlooks. I thank you all for that. We plan to present the main findings in a moment, and I really encourage those who haven't done so yet to also take a look at the publication you can find on our website as of today. We'll definitely go into more detail in the report itself in a brief moment. We also very much look forward to hearing from you directly. What are your immediate reactions, any questions you might have? For that reason, you find now on the screen a few housekeeping rules and a link to a Slido application. As you already heard, by default, we have put all microphones on hold, but we really do encourage all of you in parallel to this webinar to connect to the Slido website. You find the website here, you find the connection code, and you find a QR code in case you want to dial in via any other mobile device. We will not be using the chat function in GoToWebinar, but again, I encourage all of you to connect to the Slido application and engage with us via that platform. Any thoughts you have, any questions you have, I really recommend all of you to indicate your name and affiliation when posting a question. We will make sure we have sufficient time at the end of the webinar to go through the main questions. You can also look at other people's questions and upvote them. Any detailed questions, my colleagues are here to respond to them directly. If we would be short on time to handle all questions, we'll make sure all your questions are taken into account afterwards, and you will receive a written response either directly or via our website. I hope that is clear. I hope all of you had a chance to connect to the Slido application. We'll make sure the link, the connection code is always visible throughout the presentation, so you can always connect, and please engage with us with your questions via that platform. That being said, I would like to continue with the main part of the presentation. Before diving into the report itself, it's my pleasure to hand over to Mr. Gerald Kendler, the chairman of our System Development Committee, for some introductory remarks. Gerald, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining the webinar today. You know, the Winter Outlook is a legal mandate that we present every year on 1st of December, as stated in the last bullet point, and we will do so again this year. But you know, we have extraordinary circumstances. We have the war in Ukraine, we have the energy scarcity discussion, and here it is the role of ENTSO E to provide fact-based information how we see the situation for the electricity system at this point in time. And so we are today, actually, we published the early insights, the insights report, so you can see our first insights. They will be presented shortly by Cindy, and she will go in depth with that. And for us, it's very important that we give you first-hand information on how we see security of supply for the electricity system inside Europe. And again, it is here, a few points are very, very important. First, everything we do is fact-based, and we start with a reference scenario. Based on this reference scenario, we will show you 4 sensitivities. And with those 4 sensitivities, you can get an indication what the impact of different developments of the winter could be. And one thing here is really, really important. We worked together, of course, with all European TSOs inside the EU as well as outside the EU. So we look at a little bit broader area. And what you could see is you see a slight divergence between the reports that's going to present to you right now and possibly some national reports. The reasons for those are that could be the data freeze, so that we took data from a different point of time than the national TSOs, because everyone tries to be as up to date as possible in those fast developing times. So this could be the data freeze. It could be the methodologies, because here we show single effects, but with each sensitivity, some used a combination of those effects, and then of course you get different results. And it could also be different question asked from the national government or the regulator. So there could be differences. However, the basic data, the basic work is all very consistent. So we really ensure the consistency in the background, even though you might see the consistencies that I just mentioned. And based on our findings that you're going to see in a few minutes, I don't want to keep you much longer from them. You will see that measures are needed and can support to come well through the winter. And so we are going to show you a few measures that could help and the impact they could have. And with those words, I would really like to pass on the word to Cindy. And I would like to use this opportunity here to everyone to say a very big thank you. The TSOs did a fantastic job to do this at an earlier stage. And also we had very close cooperation with the member states and the other governments, and really trying to get the best view as possible. And so the cooperation here has been really grand, and that should be appreciated. With those words, I would like to pass on the word to Cindy, and she will now give you the insights that we developed so far. Thank you very much.
Also from my side, good afternoon, everybody. So I hope you're all eager to run through the results all together. So I'm just having again problems with my, sorry. Good. So if we look at this slide, so here you have like all the key findings on one slide. So this is really like the overview of all the key messages coming out of the winter or the early report. So as Gerard already said, we started with the reference case. So already from reference case, you can draw a lot of conclusions and key insights. Then we worked with some sensitivities. We had some sensitivities that can add some additional risk. It's risk that can really materialize. So again, here you can also have some additional messages. And then, of course, as Gerald already presented, we also have some measures that help prepare us if we see some adequacy risks. So this is what we see in the orange box. I think there's a lot of information on this slide, but all these key messages come back in the later slides. So I propose that we run directly through the full results. So here you can see an overview of what are exactly our situations or our scenarios that we looked at. So we have one reference case. So what we consider in our reference case, it's really the best estimate projection from the period October to March. So as already said, we started quite early with preparing the winter outlook. So this is mainly data that we started collecting early July. But of course, if there were some big national changes that had a huge impact on the results, there were already some updates made for some of the TSOs. Also, beginning of July, there were still a lot of discussions ongoing on mitigation measures and so on. So also we asked all TSOs, if possible, to already include these mitigation measures in the data set. Also for simulations, so we always simulated gas at the end of the merit order. And this is because in all the situations, we make always the reference with, or we make the link with how much gas do we need from an electricity point of view. And also for this, it's really important, sorry, to consider gas at the end of the merit order. If we then run through the sensitivities, so for the moment we have 4 sensitivities. The one is the low demand sensitivity, where in fact it's somehow two sensitivities, because from the EU emergency intervention toolkit, we see this non-mandatory rule, which is the 10% overall electricity reduction in demand. And we see the 5%, but only on the peak hours. And it's only this 5% peak hours that is really an obligation. So we simulated for the moment both, because I think it's really interesting to have a look at both results. We have one sensitivity which is a low nuclear. Maybe just to highlight, so what we already took into account in the reference case, it's this historically low nuclear availability in France. What we try to set up with this even lower nuclear sensitivity, it's really more a stress test if, for example, there is still a prolonged unavailability of power plants in France, Sweden, and Finland. We have one sensitivity on fossil constraints. Here, fossil constraint, it's not gas, so it's really a constraint on the supply of coal for Poland and Germany. And we have one high demand scenario where we try to look at the results when people are switching from gas heating to electric heating. So again, we will show you in a minute all the results from the reference case and from the 4 sensitivities. As in the previous winter outlooks, we do this probabilistic assessment. So we are not only looking at a severe winter, we are really looking at a probabilistic assessment where we see results from October to end of March. I want to repeat, so there's no sensitivity for gas, but we try to make the link with the gas to always look at, okay, but in each of these sensitivities, how much are we dependent of gas? So for this, we invented a new unit, which is the critical gas volume, but I will also explain you this in a minute. So this is the first result for our reference case. And already in the reference scenario, you will see that the overall adequacy risks are higher compared to previous winters. And also, if there is not yet a risk, we also see that there are quite some lower margins in other countries. We also see that this is not new, that adequacy risk is especially stressed in January and February, but we already see some countries where we see issues in November and December. And this is exactly why we also started this, this winter outlook earlier this year. So if we look at the map on the left, you will see the countries where we see the most risk. So this is in France and Ireland. So in France, it's up to 26 loss of load expectation hours. For Ireland, it's a bit higher than 6 hours. We also see typically the islands in the south, so it's Malta, Cyprus, where we see also some adequacy risks. This is really because they are not well interconnected. And then we see some of the countries in the Nordics. So also here, they are mainly popping up in case of these dry seasons. As already said, we see adequacy issues in these countries, but in all the other countries, we see really that the margins are getting tighter compared to previous winters. If you look at the graph on the right, so here it's really to indicate it's somehow a heat map where you can see how the adequacy situation or how the adequacy risk is distributed over the multiple weeks. So there you can see that for some countries, the adequacy risk is really constant. For other countries, you see that it's really as from January where we see some problems. But I hope this is quite logical to read. Then, as already said, so also for the reference case, we always try to make this mapping with the gas through a definition of critical gas volume. And let me maybe first try to explain what you see on the graph on the left. So on these orange dots, so this is the historical data. It's really from the historical years. It was the gas volume that we needed from an electricity point of view. You see the orange bar. So this is the average of the historical years. Then you see the box plot, and the box plot, this is really what is coming out of the simulations from ENTSO E. And then you see what we try to show in this box plot. It's really like what is the minimum gas volume we need, what is the maximum gas volume we need, and then some percentiles in between. And the definition that we use for our critical gas volume, it's really the Monte Carlo year where we see the highest gas volume needs. And then you see that for our base case, so if you look at the critical gas volume needs, it's really that we have around, so we are still quite dependent on gas from an electricity point of view or an adequacy point of view. But if you compare this, for example, with the working gas volume, which is now in storage, it's about 1/3. If you look into the countries where we see the major critical gas volume levels, so here we talk about Germany, Spain, Italy, and France. And you also see that you have this huge margin. So we also, if the weather conditions are not too severe this winter, we see that our gas dependency is a lot lower compared to what we defined as our critical gas need. If we look at the right, so here it's the same as the slide before. So it's also somehow a heat map where you see for each country, for each week, you see how we are dependent on gas. And then on the box plot above, you see that you really see that as from January, February, that we are a lot more dependent on gas compared to the weeks before. Then we can already jump to the first sensitivity. So here you see the results from the low demand sensitivity on the 10% of electricity demand reduction. And then you see that, I think it's good news. So you see on the graph on the left that this resolves all adequacy risks. So it lowers all the adequacy risks below the reliability standards that are defined on a national level. Except for these islands in the south, so Malta and Cyprus, it is reducing, but it's not solved completely. Again, this is linked to their low interconnectivity. On the right, you can also see that this has a huge effect on how much gas or how dependent are we from gas. And so it's about 1/3 where we can see the savings in our gas needs. So this was the non-mandatory part. What is mandatory? What is in regulation? It's the 5% on peak hours. We also try to simulate this. And then on the left, you can see that it solves quite some issues in quite some countries. For example, for France, it is not yet reducing below the reliability standard, but for the other countries, it is. Of course, if you then look at the critical gas volume, there are some savings, but the savings are not as big as with the overall 10% demand reduction. If we look at the low nuclear, so maybe just to repeat, so what did we do in the low nuclear? It's for France, we reduced the nuclear availability with an additional 5 gigawatts. And then what is important for this sensitivity is to really see whether there are some spillover effects to surrounding countries, because I already said there are some margins that are getting lower. So it is really like where we want to see whether there is this impact in other countries, yes or no. I think for France, of course, if you're reducing the availability of nuclear in France, it has a huge impact in France. There was also a reduction in Finland and Sweden. So this is why we also see quite some impact in the Nordics. But it's still below the reliability measure, but we see an impact. But for the other countries, like for example, France, there is not a lot or a huge spillover effect to neighboring countries. So for example, in Belgium, Germany, we see some very particular years popping up, but the LOLI figures are still quite limited. Also here, we see a negative effect on, of course, the dependency on gas. So here we see an increase of about 10%. Then we can jump to the next sensitivity. So it's the fossil fuel constraints. So maybe just to repeat what we did, it's really a reduction of the coal and lignite supply for Poland and Germany. The same story as before. So it's really also to see whether there are some spillover effects to neighboring countries. So here you see that there's a small increase in the adequacy situation in the Nordics. It's also because they can less import from typically Germany. Also, we see that the margins around Poland and Germany are getting tighter, but again, the situation is still manageable. And we also see some small impacts on France. Probably it's also because they can import less from Germany. Also here, we see a negative impact on the critical gas volume. So here we see an increase of about 6%. Then we can have a look at the last sensitivity. So we also try to simulate if 5% of the households that are now heating with gas, and if they switch to electricity, what will happen? So it's really dependent on each country. What is the impact on the peak load? So it's really depending on, okay, but how much this country is already now dependent on gas heating. So for example, for France, we put it on the slides. So for France, it has an impact, for example, of 2% on the peak demands. Of course, I think it's quite clear if we have an increase of 2% on the peak demand, it also has a negative impact on the adequacy situation in France. For the other countries, so for example, in the Nordics, there is no impact, except for Denmark, where we see a very small impact on the adequacy situation. Also here, there is a negative effect on the critical gas volume. So with this, we went through all the sensitivities. So what we did in the previous slide was really work with these arrows to show you, okay, but is it increasing, decreasing? But what you can also find in the reports, it's a lot more details on definitions. So these are slides that you can use to help you read the results, or help with what are the exact definitions of loss of load, of critical gas volume. These slides, you will find them in the report that is published this morning, but we decided not to present it because I think I explained it orally. If it's not clear, we can also come back to this if needed. So again, all these loss of load expectation hours for the countries where we see some adequacy risks are also published in the report. And also on the right, you can find again the key messages that are coming out of all these sensitivities. And then we are almost coming to the end. So this is just the main assumption, or a repetition of the main assumptions that we took, and also some views on the next steps. So again, what we show today are the scenarios, or it's a reference scenario where it's for the moment our best estimate projection. Of course, it's the best estimate projection which we collected early July. As already said, we will publish the full report as usual the 1st of December. And for this full report, there probably are already some updates. We already launched the data collection for this. So it's just some small updates. We do not think that this will change the message enormously. As already said, we worked with 4 sensitivities. So we have a low demand sensitivity, a low nuclear sensitivity, a fossil constraint sensitivity, and a high demand sensitivity. We showed you all the results. What we did not do is like combine all sensitivities. So for a lot of national studies, you also see that there are some sensitivities or some impacts that are clustered. This is what we did not do yet. So we decided that it's also good to see like all the effects one by one. Of course, if you're starting to combine some sensitivities, the situation can get worse. We are also in discussion whether this is something which we want to take up for the publication by the 1st of July. So I think it was already said in the beginning, but I really hope that we can continue this close alignment among TSOs, among member states. We have to keep each other informed so that we can always work with the latest data which is available. As already said, so I think it's just important that everybody knows that this is an early insight report, so we will not have all the details now as in the normal publication of the 1st of December. So for example, all the Excels with the data sets they will not yet be published now. What we show here today, this is exactly what will be published. And then of course, if it's needed, also after the 1st of December, if there are some significant changes in data or assumptions or in regulation, we can, even after the 1st of December, decide to have some additional publications if this is needed, if we really think it's needed to inform the public. So this was mainly the winter outlook. Of course, after winter outlook, it does not stop. So also we have to be prepared from the planning, from the market, from operational point of view. Again, it's not only a national matter. We see more than ever that it becomes a regional matter, even a European matter. So I hope, again, that we keep each other informed. And as such, I hope we can survive the winter. Voilà, so maybe I was quite short, even I did not even use the 20 minutes, but I think it's also nice that we have enough time for questions if some things are not clear. So back to Edwin.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for a very clear presentation. I think some of the points you already said at the end already somehow answered a few questions we saw coming in. I will still encourage everyone who wants to raise a question, please do take use of the opportunity you have here to ask it directly to the team who's here in the room together with Cindy and me answer any question directly. Otherwise, we can follow up on them later on. It's good also need to remind people of what you said at the end, Cindy. So this report is being published today. It's an extensive slide deck. You find in the publication quite a bit more information on what we showed here in this presentation. You find some additional information about context, which kind of assumptions we use for generation capacity, demand profile, and those kind of elements. But indeed, work continues on the full reports coming out as every year, this time also for 1st of this December, with more explanation, more interpretation, and definitely also the full input data sets being used for this assessment. So work definitely continues. I think you summarized it quite well at the end, Cindy. The situation is tighter than other winters for the months ahead of us. With good preparations, this could be manageable if action is undertaken in an efficient manner and swiftly, of course. We see some questions already coming in. You still find the link in the chat function of GoToWebinar, and otherwise we can also still show it on the screen, of course. Let's take a look at a few remarks already coming in. I think the first one I saw at least coming in is a good one. You mentioned at the very start, Cindy. It's a very complicated, detailed modeling exercise, even though it's only visualized in a few charts during this presentation, but there's much more in the engine to come to these outcomes. Of course, it's a full scale probabilistic assessment. So one of the questions you received is, how many climatic years are you using in your simulations? Reference is made to 35 climatic years for all the scenarios. If you can clarify that, perhaps.
Yeah, so this is indeed the fact that we used, I think it's 34 climatic years, which we always combine with some forced outage drawings. So it's a lot more than 35 years that we model. But if you look at climatic years, we talk about 34 years.
Yeah, 35 years indeed, and I think also remember that they are detrended for climate change as well. It's similar to the approach used in the previous seasonal outlooks, and again, the full data package will be published with the full report on 1st of December. Okay, I go to a few other questions in no particular order, but please feel free to keep feeding the questions and indicating which questions from other participants you find relevant. Perhaps a very practical question. I think you already somehow gave the answer towards the end of your presentation, Cindy, but good to remind people. Work is indeed continuing. So the question is, from what I understood, for the full publication of the winter outlook in December, a whole rerun of the analysis can be expected with updated data from TSOs. Until when will TSOs be delivering data updates? So how do you expect the next weeks to unfold?
So we already launched again, or we opened the gates for all TSOs to update their data beginning of September. So it's somehow close, but we already now know, because we also shared all these results with TSOs, and then also TSOs, it's always if you go deeper into the results that you see some mistakes or so on. So even after the new data update in September, we already find some additional things. We already made some additional changes in our models, but we will rerun everything by the full December, or by the full report in December, based on the data collection in September, where we have the latest data from TSOs. For example, for hydro levels, this is quite important. Where, for example, for the Nordics, we had quite a dry summer. And so here we really want to work with the latest data available from them. Also, for example, on outage planning, this is something which is really can change from one day to the other. So also here, if it's really having an impact on the adequacy situation, we always find a way to align with TSOs to really capture the latest data we have, or the latest information we have.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. I hope it answers the question. I see more questions coming in. I would still encourage everyone, if you ask a question, if it's possible to add your name and affiliation. It helps us always also afterwards if we run through a discussion with yourself, or if you have to come back to you later on to know who the question comes from, of course. I think you can easily edit your name if you click on the top right of the Slido app to update that. Okay, perhaps I immediately take a question which came in directly while you were responding, Cindy, and I think you somehow answered it already, just for the clarity. For the analysis we presented today, what was the gate closure date for the analysis, which was the latest data that was taken on board? Perhaps good to emphasize that again. We mentioned it in the reports, but
what we show today.
What we show today, yeah.
So here the data we collected beginning of July, but as already said, if there were some changes or some mitigation actions that were taking over the summer, there were already quite some updates made by TSO. So I cannot give like one fixed date. It's like the most of the data, it's collected beginning of July, but again, during the summer, we made quite some updates.
Exactly, yeah. And the same also counts, of course, for the previous response you gave for 1st of December. There's a clear process for the data freeze. If something exceptional would happen in coming weeks, of course, it will be an ad hoc decision to see how we still can take it into account in further analysis. That speaks for itself, of course. Okay. A next question I see here, we already made reference to this. I tried to emphasize it in the introduction, Gail, the same you did it as well, Cindy, in your presentation. This is a pan-European assessment, which is a legal mandate and of course adds value because you take the full pan-European scope into account. With a state-of-the-art probabilistic assessment, of course, but at the same time, there are many national studies which are ongoing or were already published in previous, in recent weeks and months. Just for completeness sake, the most relevant national studies, or at least those public ones, you also find them referred to in annex of the report published on the website today, in case somebody wants to understand what happened already at national level, which complements the European study. And one specific question I see here is, well, first question, will the slides of today be circulated? Short answer, yes. What you saw today in the presentation is an extract of the report we published on the website today. So if you go to ENTSO.eu, you should find the link directly if you click on one of the links at the top of the website. The report actually is a slide deck of about 28 pages. So I hope that that answers your question. But a specific question that is added to this one here by the participant is, how are national simulations, specifically such as the German stress test, taken into account? Perhaps I'll ask you again, Cindy, if you can add to that.
I can explain. So we took somehow another approach where I already said we really decided to run like all the sensitivities one by one. If you look into the stress test of Germany, you see that it's a combination of some of our sensitivities and also, for example, some impact on the, if there is a gas disruption, some impact on gas units. So they had another approach. It's really more a stress test. It's something we are now in discussion also with German TSO, whether this is something we want to add by the simulations by December. Maybe not like to copy what they did in the stress test, but maybe combining some of the sensitivities at our site, it's maybe useful to see, okay, but if there is a combination of, how does this impact the situation?
Thank you. I go to a next question. It's a question we received quite more often in recent weeks when discussing provisional results internally. I'm not surprised we get it also here from the audience. One of the sensitivities you presented, Cindy, is on a low nuclear case. The question posed here by Klaus is, how strong will be the effect of short nuclear, I assume low nuclear availability in France to its neighboring countries, due to market coupling, making a reference to when prices go up, electricity travels to France. Perhaps it's good to clarify indeed again what inadequacy assessment covers and what it doesn't cover, actually how to read the results you presented today.
So what we took as the nuclear unavailability for France, so it's really like the same profile that was used in the report that was published by RTE in September, I think mid of September. And then we run this low nuclear sensitivity, which is also in the national report of RTE. You will see also like a second sensitivity. They call this more that if they cannot import enough from neighboring TSOs, but it comes down to also an even lower nuclear availability for this winter. We simulated with this even lower nuclear availability of, for France, this was 5 gigawatts. So to come back on what does this mean in an adequacy assessment. So what we do, we are really doing a market model run. So it's really like we model like every situation, what is the load, what is the production in all countries, what is the export or import capabilities between countries. And then we really see that if there is some capacity available and if the energy is still available in the surrounding countries, then it finds its way to here, typically France. So it's really like a market modeling that we perform for, again, multiple Monte Carlo years, because we do this multiple climate years combined with a lot of forced outage drawings.
Exactly, yeah. So to emphasize again, the modeling takes into account how a market could function without having as an objective informing how the market prices or how a market flows actually would be, just to understand if efficient market operation can ensure adequacy across the European system. It's good to keep it into mind when you read the report, of course. I see a question from Gerald Auer from Compass Lexicon. ENTSO did include in its outlook also winter 23-24. Is this planned also for the full ENTSO E report? I think reference is made to the yearly adequacy forecast, which ENTSO published last July. Perhaps ask again, Cindy, if you can add something on that.
Well, for the moment, we are only looking at the winter 22-23. We are not trying to save gas to be already prepared for the next winter. Of course, if the situation will keep on continuing, it can have an impact maybe on future outlooks, where we also have to see whether we should take this into account, yes or no. But for the current report, or for the report that we will publish the 1st of December, we will only focus on the coming winter.
Okay, thank you. I hope it answers your question, Gerald, indeed. I see a next question. Perhaps I'll pass it on to my colleague Lucas, who's also here in the room with me. It's a question about the risk which you mentioned in your first slide, Cindy, from the Irish case. If a bit more context can be given on where the adequacy risk from Ireland comes from, which are the main drivers?
So risks in Ireland are typically driven by the same factors as every year. They're really dependent on the wind generation, especially in times of the low gas generation availabilities, and the situation there is quite peculiar because they have a lot of aging gas units in their systems, which have not great, let's say, reliability metrics, so they can often go on unplanned outages, and this naturally has a huge impact on the Irish system. And during these hours, they are also dependent on the situation in the Great Britain system, and they rely also on some imports from that system. Therefore, also there is an element of the interconnection availability as well. So if the interconnections would be not available, the situation could be even worse. But to answer in a short way, the wind and gas generation availability is playing really a key role there for their system adequacy.
Thank you, Lucas. I hope it answers the question as well. I see another question which gets quite a bit of attention from other audiences, so let's take this one. The question, I don't know who it originates from, but I think it's a relevant question we received a few more times in the recent days and weeks. If extraordinary gas disruptions like what happened with Nord Stream occur, how will this impact the situation in the electricity market? Perhaps I can take it directly myself, just to emphasize again what Cindy already presented, and it's really also further elaborated in the report you find on our website today. Our report as such does not assess a specific gas disruption scenario. We reverse the case actually. We demonstrate how dependent the electricity system still is for gas supply. So you find extensive information for all scenarios, all sensitivities on country and weekly basis of what is the minimum critical gas volume, the unit you used a few times, to understand to which extent the electricity system on week basis, on country basis depends on gas supply. But it doesn't mean that it's easy to say how a gas disruption could result into an electricity problem, because many assumptions have to be made, of course, about how are users being prioritized and so on. It's good at least that the studies we've been doing so far created awareness that electricity security is still heavily reliant on gas supply security, which we are also so emerging as some of the proposals from the Commission to the Council for their extraordinary meeting of tomorrow. It's good to understand if gas supply disruptions do happen, how it impacts various demand sectors, in particular the electricity supply sector, of course. So I hope it answers somehow to what the question. Again, the report itself is very much focused this time on the implication of gas reliance, with a lot more explanation than what you saw in the presentation today. And I hope readers can take benefit of the information on that aspect in the report. I see a question from Robert Deals here. It's about demand response. First of all, thank you for the good presentation. Thank you, Robert, for the good appreciation, I would say immediately. You said that gas is always last in the merit order. The question is, what about industrial demand response? Is this taken into account? And if yes, is it left of gas in the merit order? How does it compare in the merit order compared to gas generation? Is it a cheaper resource than gas power supply? Lucas, if you can elaborate on that, thanks.
I can indeed. DSR is typically considered before we dispatch the gas, and it is simply because we really focus on defining the critical gas volume which we need in any case for European adequacy. However, maybe I would like just to clarify that we don't consider industrial DSR to be available 100% of the time, that we continuously deploy them. So there are typically some limitations on how long we can use such kind of resources in our models. So would it be just for 1 or 2 hours in a day with this unlimited amount of the capacity? So it's not really like a limited resource, but with the available properties which we have collected from the TSOs, we do consider them as running before the gas, just really to identify that critical gas volume which we essentially need for European adequacy.
Thank you, Lucas. I hope it answers your question, Robert. If you want to have a follow-up question on that, please add it to the chat, or we can have a separate discussion on that afterwards. It's an important point you mentioned on how to understand the implication of demand reduction, demand response in general. It's also a core element, as said a few times already, of the sensitivities we conducted, one of the key outcomes of the assessment, of course. I still see questions coming in, and we still have quite a bit of time left, so I keep the discussion flowing, of course. I go to a next question from Josephine Fokul. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Apologies if I don't. It's regarding the situation in Finland with the delay of Olkiluoto 3. Will it make the situation there much worse? It's one of the elements we took into account for one of the sensitivity scenarios. But perhaps, Cindy, if you can clarify again how we took that into account.
I also came back to the slide. I did not really stress this, but here you can see what we took exactly into account in this low nuclear sensitivity. So as you already said, for Finland, here we have this nuclear power plant, which is out for all winter. So this is simulated in our sensitivity.
Yes.
We also have the question if the 3 nuclear power plants in Germany are considered or not.
Correct, that's the question I was coming to as well, Gail. I was trying to combine them. Perhaps you want to take that one directly?
Okay, first of all, the decision was rather new. It was 2 days, it's 2 days old, so it's not taken into account. It's not taken into account here because it is out of market reserve for the time being. But as far as the information we have, they will be in the market until 15th of April. The laws are going to be made soon, and then of course in the updated runs we'll take it into account.
Exactly. Thanks, Gerald. I hope it answers the question as well. Another question I see here, it's good to clarify that as well on what was covered in the analysis and what people can still expect from the full assessment coming out on 1st of December. The question is, again, I don't know who it comes from, but do the results already take into account the contribution of out-of-market resources like strategic reserves? Cindy, if you can add on that.
So if you remember for example, the winter outlook of last year, there, if we model, it's normally we do the modeling in 2 steps, where we first do an adequacy assessment only based on the market resources. If we then see some adequacy issues popping up, we do a second run, or we go into discussion also with the TSOs that are impacted, and we see, okay, but are there some non-market measures that can help the situation, yes or no? And so typically then we do a second run where we include these non-market measures, like, for example, strategic reserves. This second step for this early report, we did not yet take into account. I think in the annex slide, there were already some indications on what is the actual figure of these non-market resources, because also it was already, if we talk about these mitigation measures that were already taken, there were, for example, some units that were out of the market and that now came already back into the market as a mitigation measure. So here we also see, compared to last year, that there are some shifts, some changes. Also, like Gerald now just explained, for example, these nuclear units, they were none in the market, now they will come back in the market. So it's always, we have to be, you just have to look at what was the data that was taken for the modeling. Again, these non-market resources, it's probably something which we can take into account for the full report by December. But again, for the moment, not yet considered in the results.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. I still see a few questions. If there's any other questions popping up, please feel free to still feed them into the Slido app. But I go through the ones I still see on the list here. The next question is, when is the gas winter outlook expected? In brief, this is of course the ENTSO E outlook we're talking about. The gas outlook is still being worked on by our ENTSOC colleagues. If you have any questions on that, you can direct them directly to the colleagues of ENTSOC. But one point I still would like to emphasize is that over the recent weeks and months, we definitely had a very intense collaboration also with the colleagues from ENTSOC to really understand which assumptions the other ENTSO is using. Because of course the two systems are heavily interacting with each other. I see a question from Hussam here. Hussam, good to see you again. The statement minimum gas needs for electricity adequacy equals about 1/3 of total European usable gas storage. The question is this only for the reference scenario? Cindy, you made a few benchmark examples, perhaps good again to put this into context.
No. So this indeed you can find on the slide for the reference case where we state this, it's about 1/3 of the working gas volume, so it's the usable gas volume. And then for all the sensitivities, we just showed, okay, is it increasing, decreasing? So this 1/3, it's really if we talk about a reference scenario.
Okay. I see a methodological question from Raja about for the displayed Lowly values, are they considering exchanges with neighboring countries? Short answer is yes. And perhaps for brevity, I would invite you, Raja, to take a look at the methodology in the earlier reports you find on our website to understand how the methodology works in more detail. I think this webinar doesn't allow us to go into full depth and breadth of that, but as Cindy already mentioned earlier, what the assessment covers is a full-fledged dispatch model of the European system, and interconnection exchange, of course, is one of the most critical resources we have. So yes, it doesn't take into account exchanges and support measures from neighboring countries. Again, I see a question from Gerald Auer from Compass Lexicon. It's a good one again to put things into context. Perhaps I ask Lucas also to take this one. What are the drivers for gas demand being below historical levels? I think he's referring to the nice box plot and orange dot charts we used earlier in the assessment. Despite low nuclear, hydro, and low hydro, even in the reference scenario. What's the reason for why in our assessment we show critical gas volumes quite often below those orange dots? If you can elaborate on that, please.
Yes, sure. There are actually many factors which can be driving. The main point is that we really tried not to forecast or estimate what is the expected gas consumption in the coming winter, but rather to estimate what is the essential amount of gas which we need to supply the consumers, which is a completely different story compared to the historical years. And in addition to that, there was actually added a lot of correct context in the question. So in the recent years, there was a lot of the developments in the European power system. So we had really a lot of the renewables expansions across Europe, which reduces the gas which we need this winter, as well as some member states took some preparation actions during the summer. So there were some fuel switchings maybe performed across Europe to also minimize the need of the gas fuel in the coming winter. So there could be a lot of factors which are taken into account here. However, maybe one point which I could add from the technical perspective, that in certain occasions, maybe some TSOs may need some extra gas than we identify to ensure the grid stability. But this is a bit out of the scope of our adequacy assessment, and therefore, in certain cases, we may need some extra gas to ensure the stability of European power system.
Okay, thank you, Lucas. Keeping an eye on the Slido app, and for the moment, I don't see any. Okay, I was about to say I don't see any new questions coming in, but I still see one on the one coming in right now. Again from Hussam, very nice presentation, well done. Thanks Hussam for the compliments. Last questions: were CHPs taken into account when calculating those critical gas volumes?
Yeah, so again, it's based on the data that was collected from TSO. So we gave all the TSOs the opportunity to say, okay, but if there is some CHPs which are really using gas and that they are really dependent on gas, they could provide this profile, and this is taken into account. We also know for some of the TSOs where they said afterwards that, okay, but they used not this exact category. So maybe for some of the countries it's still underestimated, but at least all TSOs could provide us this data if the CHPs, if there were some CHPs running on gas.
Right.
So again, for most of the country, it's fine. Maybe for some of the TSOs, it's a bit underestimated.
Exactly. And again, you find more context and explanation, let me call it notes or disclaimers on what critical gas volumes mean, how they were calculated, what you shouldn't take from them in the publication made today, and more information about critical gas volumes, even at country and weekly level, which really informs people about the gas reliance we foresee for coming winter and what you can take from that in terms of risk assessment. Okay, I see no further questions coming in, so I think I saw a good share of questions already coming in, which is always much appreciated, of course, but no recent new questions coming in. So I think we can slowly come to a close then of this webinar. If there's still any reaction anyone would have about the publication you find on the website today, something you were digesting from the explanation today, please do reach out to us later on via the contact forms on our website. I hope people take benefit from the publication found on the website today, which we still call an initial winter outlook report, and emphasize it again, work keeps on going, TSOs keep preparing for next winter at operational level, and also the outlook assessments keep continuing. A full report is still planning to come out on 1st of December. I cannot emphasize it enough, which we will keep updating our assessment. If data has to be updated, we will do it. If sensitivities drive us to a different direction, we will amend, of course, those perspectives. And you find a full-fledged report on 1st of December with all the usual underpinning data sets, as always, by then. And you can definitely expect a continuation of this kind of discussion in the weeks and months ahead. That being said, I thank everyone for participating in this presentation, in this webinar today. I definitely thank again the entire team here with me in the room and the TSOs connecting remotely who spent a tremendous effort over the past week and months for the efforts already done, and good luck with the work ahead of them still. Thank you to everyone for joining in today's webinar. It showed a good interest. I saw a very good set of questions as well. I hope we had an opportunity or answered most of the questions already. If you have any reflection afterwards, any question you would still have afterwards, do not hesitate to reach out to us. And with that being said, I thank everyone for joining today, and we will close this webinar now. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Bye-bye.